Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Let me give you a weekly update on the Russian aggression against Ukraine between June 19th and 25th. Last week, Ukraine received yet another evidence of Russian involvement in combat action in eastern Ukraine. Ukrainian armed forces captured 6 enemy soldiers near the Bakhmut road in Luhansk sector. According to preliminary information, 2 of them are military medics and 4 others are infantrymen. Reportedly, 3 of the detained persons are Russian citizens. One Russian infantryman is a resident of Altai Krai, which is located more than 3,000 kilometers away from eastern Ukraine. Documents that indicate that detainees served within the ranks of Russian occupational troops and prove their Russian origin were transferred to the state security officers of Ukraine for further examination. Additionally, during the above-mentioned incident, Ukrainian troops eliminated enemy armed group's commander. Later, it was determined that he had been also a Russian citizen from Kyiv city, who came to fight against Ukrainian armed forces on Ukraine's land. Now to the more detailed sector-by-sector update from the front line. The overall situation at the front line remains rather tense, with numerous armed provocations instigated by Russia-backed militants and occasional yet massive shellings of Ukrainian positions. At the same time, last week was marked with a reduction in the number of enemy attacks by 1/3 on average, from 59 to 40 ceasefire violations per day, compared to the week before. Moreover, enemy shellings were less powerful. The daily number of mortar bombs and artillery shells fired at Ukrainian positions decreased by 2.5 times. Another enemy action recorded over the last week at the front line was the use of projectors and laser devices with the aim of illuminating and highlighting Ukrainian fortifications in the Luhansk sector, as well as blind Ukrainian military personnel in the Mariupol sector. The number of ceasefire violations ranged between 48 and 23. A slight de-escalation in the recent days was due to yet another truce agreed upon in Minsk. The ceasefire regime was introduced starting from June 24th due to the necessity of security guarantees for civilians performing farming operations at the frontline area. Now we come to Luhansk sector. Last week, the situation in the sector was the tensest. Russia-equipped militants engaged positions of Ukrainian armed forces along the entire front line of the sector. The most intense enemy fire was registered in Krymske, where militants opened medium and high-intensity mortar fire several times. On June 19th, Russian proxies opened mortar fire 4 times, having discharged more than 60 bombs. On June 23rd, the invaders engaged positions of Ukrainian army along the front line in the sector with mortars and artillery. The amount of shells and mortar bombs fired by the enemy exceeded 220. On June 25th, militants focused their fire upon Troitske, where they discharged 85 mortar bombs. Another 30 mortar bombs landed near Shastya on that same day. Last week, the daily number of ceasefire violations ranged between 10 and 27. Donetsk sector. Last week, the situation in the sector was relatively stable. Russia-backed militants used small arms and occasionally opened low-intensity mortar fire in the area of Avdiivka. On June 20th, enemy fired 30 mortar bombs at Avdiivka. On June 21st, militants opened tank fire against Kamenka and Opytne. On June 23rd, invaders opened mortar fire at Zaitsevo. Last week, the daily number of ceasefire violations ranged between 5 and 12. Mariupol sector. From Monday to Friday, enemy engaged Ukrainian armed forces with small arms, predominantly in Pavlopil-Shirokino area. On June 23rd, Russian proxies opened fire twice with 122 mm artillery at Vilyen and Shirokino. On the weekend, the intensity of enemy fire significantly decreased, reaching this year's lowest ever level, one ceasefire violation on Sunday. Last week, the highest daily number of ceasefire violations was 19. Enemy continued performing air reconnaissance using drones, mostly focusing on the Luhansk sector. Last week, Ukrainian troops registered 12 episodes of enemy scouting drones, the majority of which, namely 3/4 of the number of scouting trips recorded in the Luhansk sector. Basically Bakhmut area road. Ukraine's military intelligence reports of the ongoing military assistance to Moscow to its proxies in eastern Ukraine. On June 23rd, 22 railway petroleum cars carrying over 1,300 tons of fuel arrived to Rovenki, Luhansk sector. As per intelligence reports, the total number of casualties amongst Russian proxies is 5 killed and 26 wounded over the last week. The enemy took most casualties at the Bakhmut road and in the Mariupol sector. In addition, enemy lost 3 infantry fighting vehicles at the Bakhmut road in Luhansk sector. Last week, 3 Ukrainian servicemen were killed in action, and 13 were wounded in action or suffered traumas. All 3 fatalities were due to critical wounds received by our troops in booby trap explosions at the front line. Our hearts go out to the families and friends of the fallen Ukrainian heroes defending their motherland. Last week, 1 civilian woman was wounded during combat action. The incident took place in Mariinka on June 22nd as a result of mortar shelling. In addition, 2 buildings were damaged by enemy fire in Mariinka. One of them was a private residence. Last week, Russian proxies damaged 7 segments of power lines near Avdiivka and Yasenovata district, Donetsk sector. Breakdowns were fixed by Ukrainian emergency services in a timely manner. Over the week, Ukrainian authorities arranged for access and safe passage through the government checkpoints on the contact line of 12 trucks loaded with humanitarian aid for civilians living in the uncontrolled territories of eastern Ukraine. More than 230 tons of food, hygiene products, as well as construction materials were provided by the International Committee of the Red Cross. That'll be all for today. Thank you very much for your attention.